In this video, we're going to continue our lesson on circles. So I wrote the standard form of the equation of a circle up here with some sloppy squares. That's the standard form, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, with the center being h comma k and the radius is r. So that's what we call the standard equation of a circle. But in yesterday's homework, all of our circles were either given to us in this form or we created the form based off of a center and a radius. Sometimes we had to calculate the radius, but we could easily find the radius. But today we're going to be given equations that are not in this standard form. They are in the standard form of an equation, but not the standard form for a circle. So how do we put this into the standard form for a circle? Well, I want you to notice that the standard equation of a circle, these are perfect squares. They are perfect square trinomials. So what we're going to do is we're going to complete the square for each of these equations. So the first thing we do is if there's a constant, we move the constant to the other side. But I want you to notice here, there's no constant. Every term here has a variable in it. The second thing we do is we group all the terms with like variables together. So x squared is by itself. It has no like terms. But my y squared term has a term that has a y in it. So I'm just going to put it in parentheses here. And when we complete the square, we add a constant to these two terms so that when we factor it, it's a perfect square. But we know, based off of our properties of equality, that we can't just add a number to one side. We have to add it to both sides. So how do we compute that number? Well, I'm going to box in this 8. And that's what we're going to use over here in our calculation. We're going to take our 8. We are going to multiply it by a half. I want you to notice it's always the number in front of the unsquared term. Okay, so we're going to multiply that 8 by a half, and then we're going to square it. So what's half of 8? 4. What's 4 squared? 16. So I'm going to put 16, I'm going to add 16 to both sides of this equation. So now when I factor, now I'm going to show you another trick here. When I factor, I'm going to get this number in my factor. So when I factor y squared plus 8y plus 16, I'm going to get a plus 4 in my factor. A y plus 4 squared. 0 plus 16 is 16. Okay, so now what is my center? All right, so again, I have to compare this to the general form, the standard form. So this is the equation of my circle. But now I want you to notice I'm not subtracting anything from the x before I square it, so I'm really subtracting a 0. This is with the wrong sign, so I have to fix my sign here. And what squared is 16? 4 squared. So when I take a look at this, now we have it in the correct form. So h is 0, k is -4, and r is 4. So my center is going to be 0, -4, and my radius is going to be 4. So I need, for every single one of these, I need my standard equation, and I need to pick out my center and my radius. Okay, so let's do the next one. So I'm going to group my terms together that have like variables. So here I have an x squared and a 2x, and I'm going to leave some space because I'm going to have to add some sort of a number here to make that a perfect square. Plus, I like my squared terms first, so I'm going to move my y squared, my positive y squared here. I've got a -4y there. I'm going to add some number again I'm going to color code the numbers that I add. Right, my constant was already on the other side, so now I have two numbers that I have to add, a green number and a yellow number. So let's find the green number first. So we're going to take the number in front of the x term. I'm going to box that one in. I'm going to box this one in. I like to use the signs. So when I take the 2, let's do that calculation in green so we can see it. I'm going to multiply that 2 by a half and square it. Half of 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1, so I'm going to add 1 on my green line. On my yellow line, I'm going to take the negative 4. I'm going to multiply it by a half and square it. So half of negative 4 is negative 2 squared is 4. I'm going to add 4 to both those sides. So I want you to see I'm going to have a plus 1 in my first factor and a negative 2 in my second factor. So my first factor is going to be x plus 1 squared. My second factor is going to be y minus 2 squared. And then when I add all of my numbers, I get a 9. So this is not quite in the right form. It should be x minus h squared, y minus k squared equals r squared. Okay, this is my equation. I'm going to go ahead and box it in. There's only one thing that's wrong with it. It's the h value. I'm not subtracting. So I'm going to subtract a negative 1 plus y minus 2 squared equals, what squared is 9? 3 squared is 9. So when I compare that to my standard generic equation, I can see that h is negative 1, k is 2, and r is 3. So my center is negative 1, 2, and my radius is 3. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Let's move our constant in this one. Look at this. Our constant is not on the other side. So I'm going to group my terms and move my constant to the other sides by adding it. So I have an x squared and a minus 4x, and I need to add something. We'll add a green blank here. Plus, I'm going to group my y squared and my negative 8y. And I'm going to add something here. And remember, I need these blanks on both sides, so I added a 2 to 0. So I've got a green blank that I need to add and a yellow blank I need to add. So let's box in the numbers in front of our unsquared terms. So that's a negative 4 and this is a negative 8. So let's do our green calculation. We have negative 4 times a half squared. What's half of negative 4? Negative 2 squared, and that's going to be 4. So on my green line, I'm adding 4. My yellow calculation is going to be negative 8 times a half squared equals negative 4 squared equals 16. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. So now when I factor, I should see a negative 2 in my green factor, x minus 2 squared. I should see a negative 4 in my yellow factor, y minus 4 squared, and that equals 22. All right, so this is close to the form, right? This is my standard equation, but I need it to look like x minus h squared. That one looks good, plus y minus k squared. That one looks good, but this is not in r squared form. So let's just quickly write it over here. What squared would give me 22? Well, the square root of 22 squared. So when I compare it to my standard equation, I get a nice center of h, comma, k. My center is 2, comma, 4, and my radius is radical 22. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, again, I don't have my constant on the other side, so I'm going to add it. I'm going to group my x values, x squared plus 6x. I'm going to group my y values, y squared plus 10y. I'm leaving that space because I have to add those blanks. I've got a green blank to add and a yellow blank to add. Okay, so let's do our green calculation. I'm going to box in my numbers in front of my non-squared terms. My green calculation is 6 times a half squared. Half of 6 is 3. So I get 9 for my green blank. For my yellow blank, I get 10 times a half squared, which is 5 squared, which is 25. 25. Okay, so I should see a positive 3 in my green factor. I should see a positive 5 in my yellow factor. And when I add these, I get 11 and 25 is 36. That looks nice. But as you notice, we're not in the correct form. I've got additions instead of subtractions, right? X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. So I need to change these additions into subtractions. Y minus a negative 5 squared. And what squared is 36? 6 squared. So now when I compare, when I compare my standard equation to what I have a nice center of what's my h value? It's negative 3. Negative 3, not negative 2. Negative 3. What's my k value? It's a nice negative 5. And my radius is 6. Okay, we'll see if we can fit this last example in. All right, I want you to notice that negative 57, my constant, is on the other side. So I'm going to pair up my x terms and leave a blank, but I want you to notice I don't have any y terms to pair up, so I don't need to complete that square. Okay, so I only have a green blank to fill in here. So if you don't have an unsquared term to match up with your squared term, that means you don't have to complete the square for that. You're done. So what am I going to put on my green blank? Well, I'm going to box this in. Okay, so I'm going to take 16, I'm going to multiply it by a half and square it. Half of 16 is 8, and 8 squared is 64. So when I factor this, I get a nice x. I should see that positive 8 in my factor plus y squared. And if I subtract 15 from 64, I get 49. But when I compare this to my standard form, it doesn't really look anything like it. So I need to turn it into something that looks like that. So I'm going to change my addition into a subtraction. For this one, I notice I'm not subtracting anything from the y, so I'm just going to say I'm not subtracting anything. That's subtracting 0. And then what squared is 49? 7 squared. Now it looks a whole bunch like my equation, my standard form. Okay, so h is going to be negative 8. K is going to be 0. So I've got a center of negative 8, 0, and a radius of 7.